So maybe you've bought a new TV, or you've had one for a while that you want to get the most of, but TV settings suck. What do we change to guarantee we get the best picture? And why aren't manufacturers just putting the best settings as the default anyway? Look, I plan on being your guide among this vast array of different TV settings. I'm going to give you an easy, universal guide so that you can get your settings the way that you want them to be. But first, a couple of disclaimers. All of my recommendations are just that. Recommendations. You don't need to change everything I tell you. And while we're there, you don't have to listen to anyone else on this platform. Especially when they tell you to turn off motion smoothing every time. Always. And you like your movies buttery smooth. And just because they want to put up with the judder doesn't mean that you should have to. I mean, come on! It's unwatchable! Look at the writing! How can you even read it? With motion smooth, look at the difference! It's an absolute disgrace! The other disclaimer is that these settings can be quite generalised. Look, I can go into more detail on every TV that has ever existed and ever will exist, but I'll be quite honest with you. I can't be asked to do that. So we're all going to go on this universal route and just sort of get a vague idea for every TV. Let's go! So, jumping right in at the start, picture mode. It's important to note here that manufacturers don't like to put the best settings on the TV out of the box. They put them in ultra vivid super mode so that they can flex in TV showrooms next to other competitors' TVs. And the reason they do that is because, as consumers, we suck. We see the brightest, shiniest thing and we go, ooh. We just go and buy that one. And it's also important to note that these settings are really not ideal. They're often colour graded to blue and the saturation and the brightness is just horrendous. But the problem is, you'll only notice that when you pull it away from all of its roided friends at the TV shop. So when you're sat at home and you're trying to watch a movie and it just looks wrong. You're trying to watch a scene that's designed to be intimate and get you immersed in the film, and it's just so bright and garish. Now the problem with changing this and moving it to something like a movie mode, for example, is the fact that it will make that new mode look really dull and yellow. And that mode isn't actually a bad mode, even though it might appear to be. It's actually a more accurate mode. But this happens because we suck at figuring out what's going on with our eyes. Our brains can get used to colours fairly quickly, and a lot of the time we can't tell how different a colour is until we've seen it side by side with the one we're comparing it to. So I would definitely change the picture mode to something like movie or cinema, or if you've got a slightly more higher end TV, an ISF mode. I'd avoid any sort of dynamic or vivid or sport mode. But then once you've changed it, don't look at it. Leave the room, have a cup of coffee, and then come back in a minute once you've sort of distracted your brain a bit. It will still probably seem a little bit different, but going from the direct contrast to super bright blue to dull yellow, well, a lot of people are going to struggle with that. And look, it works the same with something like Night Shift on your phone. If you watch it turn on, you can see the colour drain in it go very yellow. But actually, if you just happen to pick your phone up and the second time you picked your phone up it was on, there's a good chance that you wouldn't even notice. So next we have some of our basic settings. So for your backlight, you're going to want it at 100% unless that's uncomfortable for you. Ideally you want this one to be quite bright because that is going to be the only actual control of brightness that you can get. Now the brightness setting, leave that at the sort of default level, normally about 50%. You don't want to be turning it down and making the image darker, and you don't want to be turning the image up and trying to make it lighter, because it doesn't actually make it brighter despite it being brightness settings. It just sort of makes the dark points lighter, so it just washes out the image. It's like watered down gravy. Gross. Sharpness, leave it off or very close to 0. The problem is that if you have it on and you have it quite high, what you can get on some gradients is a sort of grainy effect, and also around sharp contrasted edges it can then almost create a halo where you can get bright white outlines between things, and it doesn't look good at all. It doesn't actually make anything sharper, it just pretends to. Colour saturation, again, middle it out. You don't want it to be too high and you don't want it to be too low. Just leave it alone. Colour and tint. Leave it alone. It should be fine out of the box, especially in something like movie mode. Motion smoothing. Now, I mentioned this earlier in my little rant. This can have different names depending on the brands. For example, LG use the name True Motion. Just look for a setting with something similar to motion in it, and now I would put this down to personal preference. Like I said earlier, a lot of people say to get the truest, purest picture, you should have it turned off. However, some people just prefer it to be a bit smoother, and that might be you. The best thing to do is to have a little play with it and see what works. If you find you don't like it, turn it off. But actually, a lot of TVs have the option to be able to scale it, so it's worth having a little explore if you've not liked it in the past. Now personally, I don't mind it at all. Energy saving mode. Whose stupid idea was energy saving mode? Turn it off. I don't care about you, planet. I'm trying to watch TV. To be fair, the energy difference isn't that different between modes, and I'm pretty sure they're only doing it to get an upgrade on the sticker that they can stick on the box. If you have a TV that supports local dimming, something like a full array LED TV, I recommend you turn it all the way up. Some TVs will have on and off, some TVs will have some sort of scale. I'd recommend maxing it out. I would definitely recommend putting that up because that's going to give you the best black levels. Now the only exceptions to that is if you're watching a lot of dark content with subtitles. The contrast between the bright white letters and the dark screen can sometimes be very off-putting, so if that will bother you, then potentially it's worth turning it off. Personally, I would always have it on. So that was pretty easy, right? For the most part, just leave it as it is, stick it in movie mode, and you're good. Maybe you want to go into a bit more detail. Maybe you want to make your TV the most colour accurate it could possibly be. That is possible through something called calibration. Now it is something I've had a go at, and it is very complicated and quite expensive to get into, but essentially what it does is it completely rejigs all of the TV's internal colour settings in order to make sure it's matching everything, and it would tweak a setting, scan it, tweak a setting, scan it until it gets it perfect. Now you can hire people to come out and do this to your TV, or you can pay a ridiculous amount of money to get the tools and learn how to do it yourself. It can work for you. Honestly, I probably wouldn't recommend it for most people. Unless you're after some form of professional setup, I really wouldn't think you would need it to be calibrated that closely. And actually, a lot of people who get their TVs calibrated often ask for them to be changed back, because what tends to happen is that the brightness settings get brought right down to become more lifelike, and it ends up giving you a much duller image. So if that is something that you're considering getting done, do bear that in mind. If you're quite happy with the picture as it is, it might just be worth sticking with it. It's odd, that, isn't it? It's odd. So any other questions or anything like that, stick them down in the comments. Do subscribe to the channel and click this video here to see some more videos about things that I've done. Whoop!